Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are going to do the inner border on Kelly's center block for the community round robin quilt along. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today we are making the inner border for Kelly's center block from the community round robin quilt along. Kelly from Kelly's Quilts and Cruises has designed this super cute coffee mug as her center block. And now it was my turn to design the outer border, sorry. And this is the border that I have decided to put onto the coffee mug. It's chaotic and fun and bright and cheerful, and I can't wait to show you how to make it. So let's dive right in. So after making the center block for my contribution to the community round robin, which was the house block, and I hope you saw that video, my next design challenge was to add a border to Kelly's coffee mugs. So I hope you've made your coffee mugs from Kelly's video, and again, all the links are going to be in the description down below, and the patterns are all available on my website at www.bitsandpiecesquilting.com. So these are Kelly's super cute coffee mugs. And because this is sort of a virtual round robin, I think historically I would make the block myself, the center block, and then I would pass it to my friend who would add the next round, who would then pass it to another friend, and so on. But because we're dealing with a little bit of an international round robin, we're actually just making each other's patterns. So I have made these patterns these mugs from Kelly's pattern out of my fabric. I have fussy cut my beautiful cone flower from my Anna Maria Horner fabric. And if you've watched any of my videos, you may remember that this is I'm pretty passionate about this fabric. So I'm passionate about this project, and I've used a little piece of one of my favorite fabrics. My challenge though was to design the first border for this. So this is a 6.5 inch finished block. And in doing the math, I realized that I was going to be able to use my all-time favorite leftover bits and pieces units. So let me show you what we're going to make. Isn't this beautiful? This is also one of my all-time favorite fabrics, and I've used it here because I just love these fish. And these are my bits and pieces units. I make these from the offcuts of the sew and flip method, and I always save them. I have a little box right here, and I trim them, I square them up, I put them in this box, and there are tons and tons and tons of them. Some of them have been sewn into 4 patches. Some of them are just on their own. I do my very best to make sure that I square them up before I put them in my little box so that they're ready to use. These ones you'll notice have no background fabric in them. Lots of these other ones do already have a background. So for this project, I decided I wanted brights, and I decided I wanted something with sort of a common background. So I pulled a bunch of them, and these are all the extras. This is all of the bonus material that you can get if you save these triangles from the sew and flip method. So save them if you don't. But don't worry, if you don't save them, I will show you how to make these in a different way. So put off these to the side. These are the ones I've pulled out that we're going to use. They all are brights, and they all have this sort of all different kinds, but all different white backgrounds. So I am going to stick a little video in here. I've demonstrated how to make these on my channel a few times before. And instead of finding something else that's a sew and flip unit and showing you all over again, I'm just going to reuse a video clip, and I'm going to put it in here. But when we come back, if you don't have these units and if you don't save these units, I'll show you how to make them. And so this, for the sew and flip method, is how we start to build our trellis units. I will need to sew another one across this side to complete the unit. But before I go over to the machine, to the iron, and press this, I want to cut off this sew and flip unit. So I'm going to cut this just with my scissors. You could take this over to your cutting table and line up a nice 1/4 inch seam there and cut it, but I just use my scissors because it's really simple. And do not throw these away. If you watch my channel at all, you know that I really like to use these and to save these. And what I do with these pieces is I run them under the machine like this. I don't run them under the machine on the diagonal to make a little baby half square triangle. I think these are just way too small. But instead I sew them like this so that this becomes half of an hourglass unit. So these are the bonus units that we've cut off as a result of the sew and flip method. I have pressed these towards the dark side, and now I'm going to line these up, right sides together. I'm going to nest these seams so that I have a nice tight fit in here, and then I'm just going to run these underneath the machine with as a rough 1/4 inch seam. And this is going to create the hourglass unit. I will take this over to the iron and I will press this seam open lightly, and then I will square this block up to 2 inches square. All right, so now you know how to make these units from the sew and flip method. I have these all squared up, but if you don't, you will cut you'll cut many 3-inch squares. But to start, draw a diagonal line on your light fabrics and pair it up with your darker fabrics, your printed fabrics. Then sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of that line and cut it apart. I'll be back in a second after doing that. So I sewed these 2 pieces together with a 1/4 inch seam along both sides of that center diagonal line and cut them apart. I'm just going to pop over to the machine and I'm going to press these to the dark side. And if you watch my videos, you know this is very rare for me. I generally press half square triangles open because I much prefer how flat they lay that way. But in this case, I want to press them open. I want to press them to the darker side because then when I lay them together, I'll be able to nest them. I'll be able to see where those seams lock together. And you really have to try this and feel it to truly understand what I mean. But you can see here as I peel this back that those corners match up perfectly. And one of the reasons that they match up is because I can feel that they're touching. So I'm just going to hit this with the iron quickly, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to draw the line to make the second seam that we have to do for these blocks. All right, I'm back. Just gave them a quick hit with the iron. I'm going to lock them back together again. We press to the dark side so they naturally line up properly. If you try to line these up incorrectly, your seams don't lock because all of your seam allowance is on the same side. So don't do this. Dark to light, light to dark, seams locked together just like this. You'll notice these aren't squared up. You'll notice that the edge isn't really pretty. That's fine as long as you can feel along this edge that those are lined up really nicely. And then draw another diagonal line across your project, across your piece, like this. And just like the first time we did this, go back over to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch on either side of that line. So I've sewn that 1/4 inch on either side, and I've zoomed in a little bit so it's easier to see. And I'm now just going to slice along that diagonal line. Ooh, not very carefully. Be careful your ruler doesn't slip, but we're fine, we can work with this. And when we open that up, we get the hourglass block. And in this case, I will press these seams open. I like it. Send the quilt police after me if you want, but I really like pressing these seams open. Things lay so much flatter this way. This one's going to be interesting because of my little wobble with the cutter, but I think I'll still be able to get that done. I'm just going to pop over to the iron and squish these down flat. All right, we're back from the iron. My seams are squished down nice and flat, and I need to square these up. So you want to square them to 2 inches. And to do that, you want to find where your 1 inch and your 1 inch line intersect with the 45-degree line. And you want to line all that up perfectly on your block. So I've got so you can see that. I've got the 45 line going down the center, and I've got the 1 inch line where it intersects right smack in the center. And then I'm just going to trim off this extra. I'm going to spin the whole thing around and do it all over again. Now in this case, just to show you how to make these, I've just used one color. But for this project, you're going to need 48 pieces of printed fabric and 48 pieces of your background fabric. You can make them all chaos colors as you wish, or you can do like I did and do some that are background and some that are colors, whatever you want, whatever works, whatever you've saved, any of those options work. But for this demonstration, I've just used one piece. But you'll want 48 of, in my case, printed fabric and 48 of the background. And from those 96 pieces, 48 of each, you can mix and match. So I would do the first step. I would make that initial half square triangle, and then I'd mix and match all of those to get the chaos that you see in my example. So now with both of these sewn and trimmed, we have the perfect hourglass blocks. Now, one thing I should point out is if you use the sew and flip method and you save these ones are actually going to be on the bias. You shouldn't be pulling this, but if you did, you'll see that it's actually really quite stretchy. But the way that these are sewn, there is no bias edge here. This is nice straight of grain edging. So these ones are going to be a tiny bit stretchier than these. So you can mix and match them. I'm going to toss these into my bin and it'll be fine. But just be aware of that as you're sewing it together. And when you're finished your block, and I'm going to go do that right now, once you're finished your block, you'll want to make sure that you sew what I saw recently called a victory lap, which I think is a great word, a great expression. And it's a thin little basting stitch all the way around the edge, just 1/8 of an inch from your edge. And you want to do that so it keeps all these seams closed and it prevents any further stretching along those bias edges. So once you have your 48 hourglass blocks made, you want to turn those into 4 patches. And so I start by making 2 patches. So this is an example of a 2 patch where I have sewn 2 hourglass blocks together. But you'll notice that they are sewn not in the same direction. So you get this, I don't know if it's a broken dishes layout or what the layout is, but you mix these up a little so that you don't have the same fabrics touching each other like this. So you get this little pinwheel in the middle. Once you have all your hourglass blocks made, squared, and then sewn into pairs, then it's time to make 4 patches. And if you can see in this giant pile of pairs, all my pairs are exactly the same. And this is the magic of quilting and the magic of 4 patches, I guess. These are exactly the same. I can't make a decent 4 patch like that, but when I spin it around, they work out perfectly. So I made them all exactly the same, and now I will go through and I will pair them up into 4 patches by spinning them around so that I get my 4 patches to produce that pinwheel in the middle. Make sure you pay attention at this step because you want these all to be exactly the same, because this is different than this, and it will be very difficult to then sew those 4 patches together. So be consistent here and make sure that you make all your 4 patches exactly the same. And frankly, it doesn't matter which way that is, just make sure they're all the same. There's a lot of pieces here because this is enough for 2 blocks, but you will need 12 4 patches. I'll come back after I sew my 2Zs together into 4Zs, into 4 patches, and then we'll talk about adding them to the coffee mugs. So I sewed those 2 patch units of hourglass blocks into a 4 patch unit of the hourglass blocks, and you can see I've pressed the seams to one direction in the 2 patch units, and then I've just pressed the seams up in the 4 patch unit. And this will give me the opportunity to alternate these seams and nest them together. There's a lot of bulk here. I might revisit this approach in the future and look at pressing the seams open. But this is a very traditional quilting way of doing things, and it does help line up these seams in the final project. So to put these around your coffee mug, it's really quite simple. We're going to put 2 on each side like this, and 4 across the top and bottom. And with the seam allowances, this is going to look big, but once you sew them all together, they will fit. So just arrange them however you wish. I'm going to try and got some of the same fabrics in different places here, so I'll maybe swap them around a little bit just to get a nice mix of color all the way around. And so what you want to do is you want to sew these two together and sew them onto the side. And I'll come back and show you what that looks like. And then sew these four together into a row and these four together into a row and add those to the top and bottom. So I have sewn my the two 4 patches of Hourglass blocks together and then sewed them to the side of the coffee mug. And I've pressed those towards the coffee mug. A lot less resistance in the seams that way, and those are laying nice and flat. And then I sewed the top and bottom, the four patches of Hourglass blocks together. And it doesn't matter how you press this middle seam. You can press it left or right, or even open if you wish. I did, however, make sure to press these seams to the outside because these seams are pressed to the inside. So now that these are pressed to the outside, these corners will nest up nicely on both the top and bottom. So I'm going to go and sew these on, give it a final press, and then we're going to talk quickly about the victory lap. So this is the final block with those top and bottom borders sewn on, and I've pressed those to the inside so that it lays nice and flat. Your final block should be 12.5 inches square. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you may want to do, and I really recommend you do, a victory lap around the edge. And I don't know if you can see that. I'm trying to push it up nice close to the camera. It's this thin little seam right along the edge of the block. And the idea here is to hold all these seams together and give a little bit of stability to the bias edges that you've got on the block. I generally do this around every quilt that I make that uses a piano key border or a pieced border of any sort. And it just adds a little bit of stability until you're able to move on to the next step and sew all those seams into another seam allowance. Whether that be, in this case, another border, or if it's the outside edge of a quilt border when you sew the binding on. So I'm going to do a victory lap on this one, and I'm going to sew some more of these to make my third coffee mug, to make the border for my third coffee mug. And then this step in the round robin will be finished. Thanks very much for watching this video on the inner border for Kelly's coffee mug. As I described in the first video and as is written in the description box down below, you can get all of the patterns for all of the steps in the community round robin so far from my website at www.bitsandpiecesquilting.com. At the end of our community round robin, the entire pattern pack will be available there. And I hope you've been following along with Brenda, with Kelly, and with Future Cat as we have made our center blocks and are working our way around the borders for our various blocks. It's been a ton of fun, and we're so glad you're joining in with us. Thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.